First Things, episode number 9.
I seem to be lost.
And so you're working around the clock so you don't take time for yourself to feel like an actual human being.
I used to feel like no matter how hard I worked, I was just spinning my wheels.
Trying to be perfect, we try to have everything in place at one point in time, and you can't.
Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to the podcast dedicated to practical productivity based on modern research. My name is Brandon Vaughn, and it's my goal to help you apply productive solutions to your life to help you live with less stress, greater passion, and amazing results. Welcome back. Today, we are talking about a word we all have dreaded since we were babies. The 2-letter word that sends shockwaves of fear. 2 simple letters that can change the course of humanity. What is that word, you ask? Well, I will let Dr. Cox from the hit TV show Scrubs tell us now.
Good God in heaven, Nubi, there are just so very many ways for me to say this to you. Never, not in a million years, absolutely not. No way, Jose, no chance, Lance, and yet, negatory, nah, and of course my own personal favorite of all time, man falling off of a cliff. No!
That word is no. N-O. I want to talk about ways to say no today. Better ways to handle conflict. How to say no to manipulation and guilt. We won't talk today about saying no to the urgent, unimportant matters to say yes to the non-urgent, important matters. We'll cover that later. Instead, we are talking about how to deal with manipulation, criticism, and guilt. How to deal with conflict. In order to live with efficiency and productivity, we must learn to deal with manipulation from the outside world, or to deal with criticism, or to learn simply how to say no to a world that wants us to always say yes. I want to give you some tools to help you in these areas today. I hope you will use this to gain balance in your life, and that's the goal. I don't want to encourage people into manipulating other people. Instead, I want to help people gain balance, especially if they have been dominated by manipulation, plagued by guilt, or even frozen by criticism. And as we talk through this, keep in mind that the various techniques that we talk about work better in some situations than others. For example, some are better for people you don't know, like a salesperson, but might be bad to use with your boss or family member. And I will give you some guidance to these issues as we discuss them. So before we start, let's paint the big picture of what we're after. Because the word no can easily be a very negative word to many, and I hope by the end of this podcast that you won't see it in such a negative light if you do. It's just a word, and it's going to enable us to do something very important. I want to give you a bigger picture of why this is important. Because your most powerful no is a well-defined yes. Let me say that again. Your most powerful no is a well-defined yes. I love Jim Carrey. I'm a huge fan. And he had a movie a few years ago called Yes Man, about a man who always said no to everything, and through a series of events started saying yes to everything, which wasn't necessarily a good thing, but it was a very interesting kind of dilemma that he was going back and forth in this. And I do mean everything he was saying yes to. Listen to this clip from the movie.
We're going to make a covenant, Carl. Do you want to make a covenant? The word is yes, Carl.
Yes! Yes! Yes!
Once you leave this building, every time an opportunity presents itself, no matter what it is, you will say yes.
Yes! 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 Yes!
Yeah, what if I say the other word?
You'll be making a promise to yourself. And when you break a promise to yourself, things can get a little dicey. What do you say, Carl? You ready to make a covenant?
Yes.
Yes!
Yes.
Yes!
Again.
Yes.
Say it again.
Yes!
Make me believe it.
Yes! Yes, yes, yes!
So keep in mind that the big picture, what we are aiming for, is an integrated yes-no. Not just a no, not just a yes, but an integrated yes-no. Does that make sense? Because it isn't about saying no to everything, nor yes to everything. The reason we are learning to say no is in order to say yes to the things that are important. And I find that we get it all backwards. We end up saying no to the important things and yes to the unimportant. We will say no, for example, to writing our first book instead of mindless TV. We say yes to career and money instead of saying yes to family, relationships, and children. Our no is as only good as our yes. So ultimately, we want to say no to manipulation, not only because we want to protect ourselves, but because these things can be major obstacles in our life if left alone, and thus will ultimately prevent us from pursuing our greatest potential and passions, which is just a fancy term for what I call happiness. Listen to this small clip from Karen Aviv talking about how saying no opens up the possibilities to say yes.
What I want to suggest is that saying no can be a form of freedom and liberation. And I don't take that lightly. A form of freedom and liberation can come from saying no because it means you have more space to say yes to what is really meaningful and what is really deeply important to you. And what I'm talking about is more relaxation. Saying no to assignments or volunteer tasks that you don't really, really love. Oh my gosh, all of a sudden, all this free time opens up. Saying no to people who deplete you of your authenticity means that you have space to find friends or hang out with family members who really see you for who you are and accept you unconditionally with love, not rejection. It also can give you more honesty with yourself when you say no.
So we are talking about balance, not being a bully, but not being a doormat either. Expressing your feelings, but listening to the feelings of others. My main goal in this episode is to help people who have had a hard time saying no. Anyone listening who struggles with being a people pleaser. I won't be focusing on people who struggle with the opposite problem of aggression and who have tendencies toward manipulation. Perhaps we'll deal with that at some point in the future. I find my struggle has been more to say no, to quit being a people pleaser. And a lot of people I have helped have struggled with this issue as well. And that is our focus today. Remember the big picture. Your most powerful no is a well-defined yes. And that is why we're saying no to things, so that we have the opportunity to say yes to our important things. Now, let's talk a little bit about some research. Andrea Sclairth from Alliant International University found this major study, which showed a strong correlation between handling conflicts constructively and emotional health. So there was a tendency that handling conflicts constructively was tied into happiness, fulfillment, and so on. But we need to be careful because we're not saying that handling conflicts makes you happy, just that they tend to be related to each other. So handling conflicts better may not make you happy, but happier people do tend to handle conflicts better. And interestingly, she found that age had no impact, so it wasn't a matter of being older or younger in this case. Most research sees two competing principles at play here, a concern for self and a concern for others. A person's conflict style is said to incorporate both dimensions in varying degrees. So a high concern for both self and others defines what is known as a collaborating or a win-win style, while low concern for both self and others defines an avoiding style. A high concern for self but low concern for others describes a competing or a dominating style. And a low concern for self but a high concern for others describes an accommodating or a people pleaser style. Now, what do I mean when I say win-win? And this comes from Stephen Covey. This is what he says about a win-win situation. He says, think win-win isn't about being nice, nor is it a quick fix technique. It is a character-based code for human interaction and collaboration. Most of us learn to base our self-worth on comparisons and competition. We think about succeeding in terms of someone else failing. That is, if I win, then you lose. Or if you win, then I lose. Life becomes a zero-sum game. There's only so much pie to go around, and if you get a big piece, there is less for me. It's not fair, and I'm going to make sure that you don't get any more. We all play the game, but how much fun is it really? Win-win sees life as a cooperative arena, not a competitive one. Win-win sees life as a cooperative arena, not a competitive one. Win-win is a frame of mind and heart that constantly seeks mutual benefit in all human interactions. Win-win means agreements or solutions are mutually beneficial and satisfying. We both get to eat the pie, and it tastes pretty darn good. A person or organization that approaches conflicts with a win-win attitude possesses 3 vital character traits: integrity, sticking with your true feelings, values, and commitments; maturity, expressing your ideas and feelings with courage and consideration for the ideas and feelings of others; and abundance mentality, believing that there's plenty for everyone. Many people think in terms of either or. Either you're nice or you're tough. Win-win requires that you're both. It's a balancing act between courage and consideration. To go for win-win, you not only have to be empathic, but you also have to be confident. You not only have to be considerate and sensitive, you also have to be brave. To do that, to achieve that balance between courage and consideration, is the essence of real maturity and is fundamental to win-win. So a win-win approach to conflict is very upfront with how you feel, while at the same time genuinely wanting to understand how the other person feels. It's fluid and flexible and strives toward a solution that works for both parties, even if not what each party ultimately would like, and is something that we strive toward, but honestly isn't always possible. There are times when win-win isn't good. If your child wants to do something destructive, then win-win isn't an option to me. If someone is trying to manipulate you and they aren't willing to a win-win result, then you have to take a stand. And then there are areas that honestly don't matter much to you, and thus you must pick your battles and go after things that you really care about. Afzal Rahim from Western Kentucky University is one of the leading experts in conflict theory. And he has concluded that we all have 3 types of ways that we handle conflict. People that we have control over or who need us, like a salesperson or children or customer service. People that are our equals, like a spouse or coworkers, and people over us, like our boss. The assumption is that people will exhibit different styles when facing these with lesser power, equal power, or more power. So when you think of how you approach conflict, things aren't always applicable across the board. Now, this is important to keep in mind when you read about some of the things and when you hear some of the things we're going to talk about today. Anytime people recommend things on handling conflict or saying no to your child is much different than saying no to your boss. In experimental research where concern for self and concern for others was manipulated, the optimal point was achieved in study after study when people approach conflict with both a high concern for self and a high concern for others. Interestingly, research doesn't suggest that it is better to eliminate all conflict, but rather that when there are disputes, a win-win approach can affect whether those disputes are resolved and thus the degree to which the parties who are involved feel like they can continue to be in conflict with each other or have some resolution. Emily Amanatella from the University of Texas found that people who were totally focused on a dominating style were frequently labeled with negative social judgments, particularly for women. Her study focused more on a self versus others approach and never actually looked at the mixture of the two, which the majority of research says is the optimal way to handle conflicts. Raymond Friedman from Vanderbilt University show that people whose focus was more win-win produce an environment with less conflict, while those who are more dominating or avoiding produce an environment with more conflict. These differences in conflict level in turn affect stress. Now, his results suggest that employees facing high conflict, high stress environments may be able to shape that environment by modifying how they approach conflict. And he found that win-win reduces experiences of both what he calls a task conflict and relationship conflict, thus reducing stress. By contrast, the avoiding or dominating styles increase task or work conflict, which in turn increases relationship conflict and stress. People-pleasing, it also increases stress because those who favor people-pleasing were shown to not handle the stress related to conflict by ignoring their own needs. So the research basically says that a win-win approach to conflict is often the most beneficial way to handle conflict, especially with those who are your equal or maybe who are above you in power. Now, I want to shift gears and talk a bit about the people pleaser mode in life, since this is an area that I've personally struggled with. In order to utilize win-win situations, you must be willing to express your feelings and take a stand for what you believe in. Now, some of us take a passive approach to life and relationships. Instead of standing up for ourselves, we let others walk all over us. We are continual people pleasers. Perhaps we have a hard time saying no to requests, even unreasonable ones. When we want or need something, we're afraid to ask for it because we don't want to inconvenience others. Now, I want to speak about myself. I have dealt with these issues my whole life, and while it would appear I was being generous and flexible and extremely polite, really beneath the surface, you would find a very helpless, anxious person. I've realized my ability to say no was tied to my self-worth, depended upon the approval of others and getting everyone to like me. Now, some might think the solution is to swing to the other extreme and go from being passive to highly aggressive. Instead of meekly submitting, they feel like they have to dominate in every situation. They seek to get their way in everything, no matter what. But instead of passivity or aggressiveness, the best approach lies somewhere between the two. So our goal is a healthy confidence and to be able to stand up for yourself and your rights while respecting the rights of others. To not need people to validate us and our worth. We need to learn to be direct and honest with people, not beating around the bush or expecting people to magically read our minds of what we want. If something is bothering you, speak up. If you want or need something, then ask. Yet, I do believe in balance. Do all of this while maintaining a calm and civil demeanor. Respect others. Give them dignity. Love people. Yet, don't be afraid to say no. Keep in mind, while you can make a request or state an opinion, others are well within their right to say no or to disagree. Don't get upset or angry with that. When that happens, stay in control and, if possible, work to come to some sort of compromise. You might not get what you want, but you most likely never will if you don't ask. Don't expect people to read your mind. Do you honestly expect others to recognize what you need and want without you saying a word? You know, last time I checked, not even the latest, greatest smartphones from Apple, Android, or BlackBerry can do that. If you want something, say it. If something bothers you, then speak up. Never assume that people know your every need or want. It's not that obvious as you might think. Also, understand that you are not in charge of how others feel or behave. Let me say that again. You are not in charge of how others feel or behave. It is not your job to control or to worry about other people's behavior. You are only responsible for how you behave and feel. You won't believe how much less stress and anxiety you'll feel once you understand this. You'll no longer spend, wasted hours wringing your hands worrying about whether someone will be happy with your choice or your opinion. Now, this isn't to say that you should be an inconsiderate jerk and shouldn't take into account the feelings and situations of others. It just means you don't need to go overboard and be so overly considerate that you don't make any requests or stand up for your values out of fear that you upset or offend someone. Let them decide whether to be upset or offended. That's their responsibility, not yours. But there is even a bigger secret here. If you aren't responsible for how other people behave or feel, that means that other people don't have the ability to make you feel anything unless you choose to let them. No one has to upset you. Instead, you let them upset you. Now, I can understand this is a very hard pill for some of my listeners to swallow. It was for me. But I have to learn to change how I think, how I talk to myself. So before I might say, he makes me so angry, now I take responsibility for how I feel, and I tell myself, I'm letting him make me angry, but I choose not to let him control me or my emotions. Most of the things that you get upset about aren't your issues. The driver who cut you off this morning, well, their driving is not your issue. All you need to worry about is getting safely to your destination. That lazy coworker who isn't doing their share of the work, not your issue. All you need to do is focus on your own good work. So let me give you some tips to help with this. First, realize that you cannot control other people. They are going to do crazy, stupid, incorrect things all the time. You can't force them to do anything else. You can't force someone to stop being lazy or lying to you. The only person you can control is you. You get to decide how much you're going to let this person's behavior impact you. Your worrying, obsessing, venting, and so on has zero impact on them. It only hurts you. Also, as hard as this might be, examine your role in the behavior. Did that driver ahead of you cut you off because you started talking on your cell phone and you slowed down to 20 miles per hour? Did your teenager lie to you because the last time he told you the truth, he was grounded? Now, I'm not condoning any of the behaviors. I'm just asking you to look at the only person that you can control, and that's you. Maybe you are playing a role and not even realizing it, but realize it may have absolutely nothing to do with you. This is more often the case. We are all the center of our own universes. And many times we think people are doing things because of us or to us, and they aren't. The driver may not have even seen you. Your teenager may be lying just because he doesn't want to be embarrassed. I want to share another idea that has brought great freedom to my life. I used to be so obsessed with what other people thought of me, their approval. What are they thinking? Do they like me? Do they approve of me? And I would constantly be thinking about that, trying to read their faces, their body language, their inflection in their voice to try to say, do they approve of me? Do they like me? Here's what I've realized. Most people aren't typically thinking about me. They are thinking about themselves. And even if I'm doing something, they internalize it and are thinking about themselves. Now, this is such a relief. Why worry about what people think about you? They aren't. They aren't thinking about you. Now, can you step back and realize that sometimes we receive the negative from people who aren't thinking about us? They aren't really thinking about us. They are reacting to their own pain and hurts. Again, this doesn't justify what people do, but it can bring you greater freedom in not letting people control your emotions. People really aren't thinking about you, so quit worrying about what people think about you. And thus, can you let it go? Think of whoever drives you crazy right now. Get worked up. Think of how they lie to you or how they don't do their share or how selfish they are. Whatever it is that they are doing that drives you crazy, now assume that they will never change, ever. Now, can you just let it go? Is it really a minor thing that you've been focusing on and making it a major thing? Pick your battles. Sometimes you shouldn't let things go, but can you focus on the good more than the bad? And if it's really bad, do you need to just let them go? Some behavior you can just let go of. Sometimes there's not enough good to offset the bad, and therefore the best thing to do may be to just let go of the relationship. Why are you staying with someone who causes you so much pain and upsets you so much? If you can't let go of the relationship, say it's a coworker, then can you let go of thinking so much about them? Because I bet that they aren't spending so much time thinking about you. The bottom line is that you can't let the behavior of others steal your joy. And if you do, you have to realize it's your choice. Focus on being the best and happiest that you can be. That's where the energy should go. Set the best example you can and spend time and energy on people who lift you higher and make you feel good. If you struggle with saying no or voicing your opinion, realize that it takes time. Don't think you'll magically do this by listening to this podcast. This takes time and practice. You'll have good days and bad days. Just be persistent with your efforts and it will pay off. Work on it, small pieces at a time, small victories, and keep pushing forward. Now, as always, I want to move into some action steps. Today, there's a lot of them. 10 actions you can start doing today to handle conflict, criticism, manipulation better, and to learn to say no. Number 1, start small. If the thought of standing up for yourself makes you downright nauseous, well, then start with some low-risk situations. For example, if you order something at a restaurant and you order a burger and the waiter brings you a grilled cheese, well, let him know the mistake and send it back. If you're out running errands this weekend with your wife and you're trying to decide on a place to eat, don't just automatically defer, but chime in where you like to go. Once you start feeling comfortable in these low-risk situations, then start upping the ante little by little. You should also rehearse. Play out the scenario in which you plan to assert yourself. Sure, it's kind of goofy, but practice that. Practice what you'll say and do it in front of a mirror. I mean, it really helps. It sounds silly, I know, but it really helps. Think about your strategies. How do you see yourself responding in situations that are formal or commercial, like with a salesperson? How do you see yourself responding to an equal or to authorities? If you feel you failed in one of those areas, then think through that situation and how to respond better the next time. Learn from your failures and don't beat up on yourself. Number 2, say no. In your quest to become more assertive, no is your best friend. Start saying no more often. Does a request conflict with a personal boundary? Say no. Schedule's already full? Just say no. You don't have to be a jerk. It is possible to be firm and resolute with your no while being considerate. At first, saying no will probably make you feel very anxious, but eventually you'll start to feel good about it, and it will actually be quite freeing. Listen to this talk by Kenny Wynn, and I'll post a link to the entire clip in the show notes.
Yet, for some reason, there are so many yes men out there, yet you think to yourself, are the world's most successful people yes men? Do you think public figures like Nelson Mandela, Martin Luther King, and Steve Jobs said yes to every opportunity thrown their way? Steve Jobs actually said, I'm just as proud of the things that I haven't done as the things I have done.
Number 3, say yes. Now, this may sound kind of weird because I just said number 2, say no, and now I'm saying say yes. But remember, the main goal in saying no is not just to stand up for yourself, but it's to enable the opportunity to say yes to what really matters to you. So, what are the important things to you? Do you even know? Have you thought about this? If not, you should. You should think about this. Write it down. Knowing what you want to say yes to will make it a lot easier to recognize and say no to the things that distract you from those important things. Number 4, be simple and direct. When you are asserting yourself, less is more. Keep your requests and preferences simple and direct. No need for a lot of elaborate explanations or meandering windups. Now, I've had to work hard on this because I tend to be very long-winded, as you can tell from my podcast. Just politely say your piece. Feel free to make the other person ask you for the details. Don't always feel like you must provide this information. Also, when you say it, use confident body language and tone. Look confident when you make a request or stating a preference. Stand up straight, lean in a bit, smile, or at least keep a neutral facial expression. And look the person in the eye. That is so important. Look them in the eye. And you may have to practice this if you're not used to this. Also, be sure to speak clearly and loudly enough to make your point. Passive people will tend to whisper and they'll mumble when making their opinions or needs known. That's only going to serve to frustrate that other person. So work on this. Practice it. Simple, direct. look them in the eyes, speak loudly, speak clearly, and go for it. Number 5, expect some resistance if people typically push you around. If you've been a pushover for most of your life, the people around you will likely resist your efforts to become more assertive. They're used to you being a doormat and are very comfortable with that relationship that has you in a very passive role. Don't get angry. Don't get frustrated if your family, your friends, or your coworkers question or even try to thwart your new assertive approach to life. You should expect that. You should actually be ready for that. Don't just assume everyone's going to embrace this. They may actually try to push against it. Be resilient. Go forward with this. You know it's good for you. You know this is what you need to do. And that's a completely normal response from people. It may not be a good response, but it is a very typical one. Number 6, pick your battles. Before you say no to something, before you engage with someone's manipulation or negative behavior, you should ask yourself how worth this is of your time and effort. Common mistake many people who are on this path to being more assertive do is they try to be assertive all the time. Now, assertiveness is very contextual. It's very situational. There may be cases when being assertive won't get you anywhere, and honestly, taking a more aggressive or passive stance, it could be a better option. It all depends. There isn't just a magic formula, but you shouldn't feel like you have to be assertive every time and in every situation. Now, how do you know when you should or shouldn't assert yourself? Well, in some ways, you've got to figure that out through practicing and exercising, just practical wisdom in day-to-day life. But here's some questions you could ask yourself. How much does this really matter to me? Will this just be a waste of my time? I always find, I've said this in previous podcasts, I always associate money to it. It helps me for some reason. Would I be willing to pay $100 to deal with this issue? Is it that important to me that I would actually spend my money to argue my point on this? And many times the answer is no, but there are times, yes, the answer is yes. Are you looking for a specific outcome, or do you just want to express yourself? Are you looking for a positive outcome? For example, if I'm around someone who is rude or upset, I will often just start talking to them about them. Like, wow, I bet it must be really frustrating dealing with picky customers all the time, huh? Might asserting yourself make things worse? Or will you kick yourself if you don't take action? What are the probable consequences and realistic risk of you taking a stand? Remember, if anything matters, then everything matters. So as you pick and choose what to passionately engage in life, ask yourself, how can I be a change catalyst in my day, in this particular situation? Find those things that you're passionate about, that really matter, and engage and let yourself be known. Let your thoughts be known. Let your feelings be known. But don't feel like you have to do that for every single situation in your life. You don't. Number 7, quit worrying about hurting someone's feelings. Don't apologize or feel guilty for expressing a need, want, or right. Unless you're asking for something that's unreasonable, there's no reason to feel guilty or ashamed for expressing a need or want. So quit apologizing when you make a request. Just politely ask for it and wait to see how the other person responds. I realize this may sound crazy, but I've even struggled with guilt when expressing dissatisfaction with something that I'm even paying for. If a contractor hasn't done the work he's agreed to, it's your right to ask that it be fixed. It has nothing to do with being polite or not hurting his feelings. It's just business, and that's how it works. You don't have to justify, explain your opinion or choices. When you make a decision or state an opinion that others don't agree with, one way in which they'll try to exert control over you is to demand that you offer a justification for your choice or your opinion or your behavior. If you can't come up with a good enough reason in the other person's eyes, you're supposed to go along with what they want. Don't feel obligated to give an explanation or justification for every single choice you make, especially if the person isn't asking for it. You really don't have to ensure everyone is okay with your choices. You don't. You don't always need to ask for permission to live life the way that you want. Don't operate like that. It is okay to change your mind. It is okay to make mistakes as long as you're willing to be responsible for them. It's okay to tell people, I don't know. In fact, you should practice that. I don't know. It's okay to tell people, I don't understand. And yes, it is okay to say, I don't care. Number 8, be persistent. You'll sometimes face situations when people will shoot you down the first time you make a request. Don't just throw up your hands in the air and say, oh, well, there's nothing I can do about that. At least I tried. Sometimes to be treated fairly, you've got to be persistent. But remain cool, calm, and collected during this process. For example, if you call customer service and they won't help you with your problem, then ask if you can talk to their manager. Or if you miss a flight, keep asking about other options like getting transferred to another airline so you can make it to your destination on time. Number 9, stay cool and keep your emotions in check. If someone disagrees or expresses disapproval of your choice or your opinion or your request, don't get angry or defensive. People have a right to disagree, just as you have a right to voice your opinion. Either give a constructive response or decide not to engage with the person any further. In fact, for everything, no matter how upset the other person gets, be in control of yourself. Remember, no one makes you angry or upset. You allow them to. You are in control. Now, this matter may take a lot of work for some listening to me, and that's okay. Don't beat up on yourself. Keep working on this. Have you ever talked to an elderly person before who was hard of hearing or perhaps wasn't understanding you, or perhaps a child? Or have you just ever talked to anyone who normally would have frustrated you, but instead you had this overwhelming compassion and sympathy for them? If you have, this is what you want to carry over into all areas of your life. Practice staying calm, not letting your emotions get away from you. I've literally practiced this. I've been driving somewhere and I will pretend situations and practice how I will respond. This includes pretending that I'm talking to a person who becomes angrier and angrier with me, who accuses me and calls me names. And I practice remaining calm. This has really helped me quite a bit. Think through what matters to you and where you base your worth and your identity. So what if someone criticizes you? Can you learn from what they say without it attacking your worth? Instead of internalizing hateful words, can you brush it off because it really doesn't matter what that person thinks of you anyway? This might sound somewhat pessimistic, but I imagine a row of 10 people who represent everyone I will meet in life. I see that 1 or 2 of those people will never be a fan of me. They won't like me, whatever I do, and they'll always be critical. Now, about 6 of those people will be neutral. They like me, but they may not love me. Then there will be about 2 people that will really love me and value me. Now, why this helps me is that I quit the delusion that I can make everyone love me. It just doesn't happen that way. It just will never happen. And it's a waste of time. Rather, I focus on those that do love me and help serve the ones that like me. When I run across someone who is always critical or manipulative, I don't internalize it as, gosh, what's wrong with me? No, instead, I realize I've run across that small group of people I will never please, and I don't waste my time and energy trying to change them. Number 10, emergency tools. Okay, there's going to come some times when you can't turn it off. You can't hang up. You can't distance yourself. A time when changing the mood doesn't work. You can't get away, and the person is trying to manipulate you or criticize you. Okay, what do you do? Now, I'm going to give you 4 techniques that you can try. First one is what I call the figure 8. The number 8, if you turn it sideways, is the symbol for infinity. Sometimes you need to persistently and calmly keep repeating yourself. Now, be careful with this technique and use it sparingly. It works great for commercial relationships, but may not work great for your boss. To use this with people you care about could end up being more about manipulation, where you keep asking the same thing over and over and over again until the person relents and gives you what you want. This can be a very helpful technique in other situations. Let me demonstrate this for you. I don't know what it is about telephone calls and salespeople. I've never read this anywhere, but it seems to be an attempt 3 times. And if you will withhold 3 times, they will give up. I've seen this over and over again. I call it the rule of 3. They will try, they'll come back with more reason, then they'll try to lay some guilt trip on me. And if I tell them no 3 times in a row, they will give up and get off the phone rather quickly. Let me demonstrate this for you. I'm going to role play here and pretend I'm in a conversation with a salesperson. Hi, Mr. Vaughn. I wanted to call and give you an exciting opportunity to sign up for a credit protection. Can I sign you up for a free trial for only $50 a month? Thank you for the offer, but I'm not interested in this right now. Okay, Mr. Vaughn, but I'm sure I don't have to tell you how identity theft is a common problem. You owe it to yourself to protect yourself and your family. Now, can I give you this free trial with a great monthly price of $50? Well, you make some great points, but I'm just not interested in this right now. Well, sure, but keep in mind this free trial is a limited time offer. You have no risk, and if you don't like it, you can simply cancel in 30 days. So what card would you like to put this on today, Mr. Vaughn? Thank you for your offer. I do appreciate it, but I'm just not interested right now. Okay, Mr. Vaughn. Well, thank you for your time today. Have a good day. Click. And then they always hang up. I have to get past that third attempt. Now, do you see what I did? I did a figure 8. I kept looping back to my stance. I'm not interested. And no matter what he said, I kept going back to this point. This is a very cool technique because you don't have to pretend you are a lawyer and come up with the ultimate argument. You just keep repeating how you choose to respond over and over again and don't give up. The second thing is what I call the wet sponge. Now, this technique can help you silence criticism, but to utilize it, you need to have started working about moving some of your worth away from people's opinions about you. When people criticize, I find they want to debate and argue. Some might actually want to try to hurt me or shame me. When I argue back with them, I find this to be much like turning on a red light. Strangely enough, for some people, a red light is more like a red cape dangling in front of a mad bull. So in this technique, we simply repeat what a person says, acknowledging that it may be true, not that it is true. Now, this will take all the steam out of most criticism. When the person realizes that you agree with what they said, or they think you're agreeing with what they said, it will often shock them and it will disorient them. And you'll find that many times they'll drop whatever they're telling you and go on to something else. This requires you not to deny criticism or become defensive. You simply become like a wet sponge, which is why I call this a wet sponge technique. You offer up no resistance to their criticisms that they hurl at you. Getting no reaction, this critic will usually just give up. Like a sponge, you're simply going to absorb the criticism and then wring out that water. Move on with your life. Let's pretend your boss is overly critical. Today, he has decided to criticize your latest PowerPoint presentation. Here's your boss. Brandon, I was not happy with your last PowerPoint presentation. It didn't seem focused. You're probably right. It could have been a little bit more focused. Well, you should have asked someone to review this in the future. You're probably right. I should ask someone to review these in the future. I just don't think you'll ever learn to do this. You're probably right. I may never be any good at it. You sound like a yes man with no spine or personality of his own. I do sound like that, don't I? You don't sound like one. You are a yes man. You may be right. See, you're doing it again. That's true, I am. I don't think you can say anything but yes to anyone. Well, I can certainly see why you think that. Now notice, all I'm doing is simply repeating what the person said, and I'm speaking in probabilities. You may be right. You're probably right. I'm not saying you are right. I'm just saying you may be right. Now, something to consider. Any criticism will probably have a grain of truth in it. Sure, I could have probably spent more time on that presentation. Sure, I could have probably made it better. Now, some may object. How can I agree with someone who tells me something that's not true? Well, remember, we aren't necessarily agreeing with them. We are simply repeating what they say with probability language of maybe so. We also need to break away from needing people's approval of us. And many times that's a big problem when we do this technique. Quite frankly, maybe we could have done it better. Maybe we will do it better. So instead of basing my identity off what they say, let me hear them out. Then I will take what they say, make my own judgment about it later in private, and then do what I decide. The wet sponge technique requires you to listen only to what is actually said and avoid becoming defensive over implications. You recognize that truth is a matter of perspective. You simply respond in terms of probabilities. You reserve final judgment for yourself. It will often come across that you are agreeing with the person, which you really aren't. and this will often frustrate a criticizer to the point that they will stop or give up. The third technique is transparency. It will help a lot in life to realize you aren't always right and that you don't know everything. And in this technique, you simply state that. Give yourself permission to occasionally fail. It is okay. And it's okay to admit it, especially if someone is criticizing you or attempting to use it to guilt you or to manipulate you. You become transparent. Listen to this conversation and see if you can pick out the times I'm being transparent and honest about my mistake, as well as when I use the wet sponge technique to absorb the criticism. Oh, hi, I'm late. You sure are. I've been waiting for you for half an hour. Oh, yeah, that's irritating. I know when you have to wait. I don't blame you for being mad at me. What have you been doing to take so long getting here? Well, nothing. It's my fault entirely. I just didn't look at the clock and, I made a late start. It's just a stupid thing to do. Well, I wish you would just be here when you say you're going to be here. You're always late. I am, aren't I? Yeah, that's dumb of me to be so careless when you're waiting for me. So where do you want to start? Do you want to start with that proposal we need to present tomorrow? And then you just go for it. Fourth technique is what I call the prosecutor technique. In this technique, you simply ask people for more information. I love watching good lawyer movies. And the most interesting ones to me are when the prosecutor asks questions in a way that traps the witness, like a chess game. They divert their attention and start breaking them down via questions. Now, you aren't asking questions in terms of motives, as if to say, who are you to tell me anything? The technique can help you identify possible win-win situations with a person. Now, let's go back to my PowerPoint discussion with my boss. I don't ask, what makes you think my PowerPoint was bad? That's a very defensive question, attacking them, basically. Instead, try saying something like this. I don't understand. What is it about my PowerPoint presentation that was bad? Do you hear the difference in that? In the first, my question was centered on them, you. Why are you upset about this? What makes you think that this is bad? But in the second, my question is more centered around the PowerPoint presentation. What's so bad about the PowerPoint presentation? Now, let's listen into this conversation. Brandon, I was not happy with your last PowerPoint presentation. It didn't seem focused. Well, what was it about that PowerPoint presentation that didn't seem focused? Well, it was just average. Well, what is it that I'm doing that made my presentation just average? Well, you're making all the typical mistakes that many make with PowerPoint. Well, what am I doing specifically that I'm screwing up? Well, a couple of things. Your slides are too busy with too many words on them. Okay. Well, anything else I'm doing that's just average and I could improve on? Notice I'm diffusing the situation by asking the person questions about myself or my PowerPoint. I'm not asking them why they feel a certain way, or I'm not attacking them. Again, the point here is to learn. You may not agree with the answers given, but listen, learn, and move on. By doing this, you will often find the criticizer to move on feeling like you've listened to their concerns. Also, using I statements is a cool technique to know. When making a request or expressing disapproval, instead of saying, you're so inconsiderate, you have no idea how hard my day at the office was. Why would you ask me to do all these chores? Why not say, I'm exhausted today. I understand you want these things done, but I'm not going to be able to get them until tomorrow. Here are some other examples of I statements. Instead of saying, you're so needy and controlling, say, I feel frustrated when you make me feel guilty for hanging out with my friends. Or, you always humiliate me when we visit your parents. Instead, say, I feel embarrassed when you insult me in front of your parents. Instead of saying, your demands are unreasonable, why not say, I'd prefer that you give me at least 3 days notice before asking me to come in on the weekend. So when you craft these I statements, be careful not to embed accusations or try to interpret the person's behavior. That will just make them defensive and cause them to shut down. So don't say, I feel like you're purposely being an idiot just to get on my nerves. Just say, I think you're trying to pick a fight. So let's take one more example of a person trying to manipulate me through guilt to borrow my car. Now, see if you can spot and hear the wet sponge, the prosecutor, the transparency, and the figure eight in my response. Then notice how I work toward a win-win situation in the end. Brandon, well, I'm glad to see you. I've got a real problem, and I was afraid I couldn't get anyone to help out. Well, what's the problem? I need to use your car this afternoon. Yeah, that is a problem, but I don't want to lend my car to you this afternoon. Why not? I agree you need it, but I just don't want to lend out my car. Do you have someplace to go? I may just want it for myself. When do you need it? I'll just get it back on time. Well, I'm sure you would, but I just don't want to lend out my car today. Well, look, I'm a good driver. I've never done anything to your car. Well, that's true, Bill. I just worry when I lend my car out, so I don't want to go through that hassle again. You know I won't damage your car. You won't. I know that, and it's dumb for me to feel this way, but I do. So why won't you lend me your car? Because I don't want to have this worry. I feel a little hurt. You aren't being a good friend to me right now. You may be right. I'm sure I could be a better friend to you. Well, so will you lend me your car? Sorry. I just don't want to lend you my car today. But after all I've done for you, I'm constantly lending you things because you're my friend. You are a great friend, Bill, and lend me stuff all the time. So why can't you do this for me? What is it about me not lending my car that's upsetting? Well, I don't know. I don't really care about your car. I just need to run somewhere this afternoon. You know, I won't do anything wrong. Well, you're right, Bill. It's not you. It's me that's the problem. I don't want to lend my car out today. But listen, I have a break from 3 to 3:30 today. How about this? I'll just take you where you need to go then. Well, I couldn't go until 4. Okay. I think I can help you at 4 and take you there. Is that okay? Okay, sure. I still don't understand what the big deal is about lending me a car, but okay, I appreciate you helping me out. Thanks. So remember, the ultimate goal is to find a working compromise, if possible, a win-win. But if not, then your goal is to simply not internalize criticism as your worth and identity. Instead, you want to learn, but also attempt to quiet down this negative event. And for people that attempt to manipulate you via guilt, your goal is to simply not allow that to happen. Well, that wraps up this episode of Learning to Say No and to be free of criticism. I hope some of the things I've shared today will be helpful for you to pursue your life with greater passion and purpose. As always, please consider leaving me a rating and comment on iTunes. That helps greatly in letting others know about the show. I've had great comments left for me this last week on my website. I hope to read that in my next episode. Again, if you have any comments on this episode, I have a discussion area set up at firstthings.com/09 as in episode 9. So until next time, remember this. Attitude is the difference between an ordeal and an adventure. Stand up for yourself and say no. But say no to enable the important things to say yes to. Your most powerful no is a well-defined yes. Work toward win-win situations whenever possible. And when you absolutely cannot, agree to disagree and use some of the techniques we talked about in this episode to push away from manipulation and guilt and criticism. Embrace today with passion and intention, and don't die with your music still inside you.